Orion Vale's head hit Silas Moreau's shoulder at 37,000 feet. No warning, no sound, just the slow, devastating collapse of a man who had not slept in 72 hours, finally losing the war against his own body. The whiskey glass in Orion's hand tilted. A single drop ran down the crystal. His fingers had gone completely slack, and the entire cabin stopped moving. Demarion, Orion's head of security, stood near the galley partition. He saw it happen. His hand went to his earpiece instinctively, then froze there. He did not speak, did not move. His eyes locked on Silas, waiting for the reaction that would decide everything. The two flight attendants at the rear exchanged one look and turned away. Nobody breathed, because this was not just any man asleep on any shoulder. This was Orion Vale, the middle triplet, the negotiator. The one the Vale bloodline sent into rooms where bullets had already been fired and somehow walked out with signatures instead of body bags. He had once sat across from a cartel lieutenant for 6 hours without blinking. He had walked through the Federal Reserve building wearing a wire and smiled the whole time. Orion Vale did not fall asleep. Orion Vale did not lower his guard. Orion Vale did not lean on anyone. And yet, his silver hair spilled across the shoulder of Silas Moreau's dark brown jacket. His breathing had gone deep and slow. One long exhale, then nothing but the steady rhythm of a body finally surrendering to what it needed. Silas did not move. That was the part that made Demarion's chest tighten. Silas Moreau sat completely still. His jaw was set. His expression was unreadable the way stone is unreadable. He was looking out the oval window at the Atlantic sunset burning the clouds orange and red. His hands rested in his lap. One finger moved once, just once, tapping the back of his own wrist before going still again. Then, slowly, deliberately, he reached for the folded jacket on the empty seat beside him. He placed it over Orion's shoulders. Not roughly, not with irritation, carefully, the way you cover something you do not want disturbed. Demarion's hand dropped from his earpiece. His face did something complicated. He looked at the floor and stayed quiet. The jet hummed on. 38 minutes passed. Hi viewers, if you found out the person you considered your biggest rival was the only one quietly protecting you, would you trust them, or would you still walk away? Then Orion's body registered the shift in cabin pressure as the aircraft adjusted altitude. His eyes opened. For exactly 2 seconds, he did not know where he was. Then sensation returned in sequence. The smell of cedar and something cooler underneath it. The solid weight of a shoulder beneath his cheek. The warmth of a jacket that was not his own draped across his back. His entire body went rigid. He pulled upright so fast that his elbow caught the armrest and the whiskey glass tipped fully, spilling across the tray table. He did not look at it. His eyes went directly to Silas. Silas had already turned from the window. He was watching Orion with an expression that gave away nothing. No smirk, no raised eyebrow, no enjoyment. His dark eyes were steady and flat the way deep water is flat on a calm day, hiding everything underneath. Orion's jaw tightened. His pulse was loud in his own ears. He was calculating in real time who had seen this, what it meant, how fast it would spread, what advantage Silas now held, what the correct response was. He opened his mouth. Silas spoke first, quietly, just above the engine hum. You only sleep when you feel safe. The words landed without weight and somehow hit like a stone dropping into still water. Orion stared at him, not because the sentence was strange, because it was accurate, completely, precisely accurate, in a way that only one other person had ever been able to articulate about him, and that person was his brother Lucien, who had known him since birth. Silas Moreau should not have known that. Silas Moreau should not have known anything personal about Orion at all. Orion's mind shifted the way it always did in a negotiation when something unexpected appeared on the table. He recalibrated, filed the emotion away, lifted the surface back into place. Don't read into it, Orion said. His voice came out level. I'm not reading into it, Silas said. I'm reading you. The cabin was still quiet. Damarian was looking at the floor. The flight attendants were absent. It was just the two of them and the burning sky outside the window and 72 hours of exhaustion still sitting behind Orion's eyes no matter how hard he pushed it back. Orion's hand moved to straighten his cuffs. A reflex. A reset. Silas watched the gesture without commenting on it. How long? Orion said. 40 minutes. 40 minutes. 40 minutes of his body betraying everything he had spent his entire life training it not to do. 40 minutes pressed against the shoulder of the one man in any room who had the most to gain from his weakness. And Silas had covered him. That was the detail Orion could not place correctly. He looked at the jacket still resting across his lap. He recognized it as Silas's. He had seen him wearing it when they boarded. He lifted it and held it out without ceremony. Silas took it back without ceremony. Neither of them said anything about it. Outside, the Atlantic stretched dark and enormous beneath them. The sunset was gone now, replaced by a thin line of violet at the edge of the world. The jet flew on in silence. Then Silas turned slightly in his seat. He said it the way you say something you have been deciding whether to say for a long time. You are being hunted by someone inside your own bloodline. Orion went very still. The engine hum continued. The jet did not shake. Nothing around them changed. But something inside the cabin shifted in a way that had nothing to do with altitude. Orion looked at Silas directly for the first time since he had woken up. And for the first time in a long time he had no immediate response. Nobody moved first. That was the strange part. In every room Orion had ever sat in, someone always moved first. Someone leaned forward, or back. Someone picked up a pen. Someone broke the silence with words meant to look calm but built to buy time. Silas did none of that. He sat the way he always sat, like he had decided the outcome already and was simply waiting for the room to catch up. Orion's first instinct was to dismiss it, deflect, turn the statement into a negotiating tactic and respond accordingly. That was the move. Call the bluff. Redirect. But something in his chest would not let him reach for that response. Because the words had not landed like a threat. They had landed like a fact. That's a significant claim, Orion said. He kept his voice exactly flat. It's not a claim, Silas said. It's a timeline. Orion said nothing. Silas did not elaborate immediately. He let the silence sit. He had a particular talent for silence. Not the uncomfortable kind that most people rush to fill, but the kind that had weight to it, the kind that said, I already know what you're going to say and I've decided you should say it anyway. Orion hated it. He had hated it since the first time they sat across from each other 3 years ago in a conference room in Geneva. He hated it slightly less at this moment, which was its own kind of problem. The attempt on your brother, Silas said. Tuesday, just after 2 in the morning. Orion's jaw locked. That information had not left the Vale compound. He had personally shut down every outgoing communication line after it happened. 3 people knew the exact time. Himself, Lucien, and the head of security who was currently standing 12 feet away pretending to study the carpet. Orion cut a glance at Damarian. Damarian felt it. He looked up, read Orion's expression, and gave one small shake of his head. A denial. Not me. Orion believed him. Damarian had been with the Vale family since before any of the triplets could read. His loyalty was not the kind you bought. It was the kind that grew over decades and held weight no paycheck could replicate. So where had Silas gotten a timestamp that specific? 2:17, Silas added quietly. The second vehicle was already waiting on the South Service Road. Orion's pulse did something it was not supposed to do. It spiked. He controlled his breathing. His face stayed neutral. His hands in his lap stayed loose. But underneath all of that, something cold had moved through him, the kind of cold that had nothing to do with the recirculated air in the cabin. Talk, Orion said. It was not a question. Silas turned more fully toward him now. Not aggressively. Just enough to indicate that what he was about to say required full attention. "I've been watching your operation for 14 months, Silas said. "Not to interfere. Not to extract. Just to watch. There's a pattern inside your logistics chain that doesn't match any of the three of you. The decisions are too clean in the wrong places. Someone is redirecting information out before you receive it. That could be any number of people below the inner circle. It's not." Orion studied him. Silas's face was angular, composed. He had the kind of features that seemed designed for difficult rooms. Nothing soft, nothing reactive. He had always struck Orion as a man who felt things at a frequency other people simply couldn't hear. "Why tell me this now?" Orion said. "Because we're on a plane over the ocean with no signal and nowhere to run, and whatever is going to happen to your brother is happening in the next 8 hours whether you know about it or not." That landed hard. Orion felt it the way you feel a door close in a room you thought had exits. He thought about Cashin. Broad-shouldered, loud, the kind of man who walked into a room and rearranged its entire gravitational pull. Cashin did not do quiet. He did force. He made things happen with presence alone. Of the three of them, he was the least likely to see a slow approach coming because he was built to handle fast ones. He thought about Lucien. Contained, precise, the strategist who rarely spoke, but when he did the entire room reorganized around what he said. Lucien would be watching. Lucien was always watching. But Lucien did not know what Orion knew, which was that 72 hours ago someone had tried to remove one of them from the board. And whoever had tried had known their schedule, their route, their security rotation. That kind of knowledge came from inside. "You said bloodline," Orion said. "I said bloodline. Meaning family. Meaning family." Orion exhaled once through his nose. He looked at the oval window. The sky outside was fully dark now. Just black nothing and the faint blinking of the plane's wing light pulsing steady and red. He thought about 40 minutes. 40 minutes he had. "I have more than that. Show me." Silas did not reach for anything immediately. He looked at Orion with an expression that was almost careful. Like a man deciding how much to hand someone before making sure they were steady enough to hold it. "Not yet," Silas said. Orion stiffened. "Because," Silas said quietly, "the moment I show you, the two of us are working together. And I need to know you understand what that means before I cross that line." The jet hummed. The wing light blinked outside. Somewhere at the rear of the cabin, a glass shifted on a surface. Orion looked at the man beside him for a long moment. He had spent 3 years reading Silas Moreau across tables and through intermediaries and through the language of business decisions designed to mirror chess moves. He had never once been able to find the angle, the personal motivation, the thing underneath the strategy. He was starting to think maybe there wasn't one. Maybe Silas was exactly what he appeared to be, and that, somehow, was the most unsettling possibility of all. "If I choose wrong," Orion said slowly, "one of my brothers dies." Silas did not flinch. "Yes," he said, "just that. One word. No padding around it." And Orion felt the full weight of the ceiling pressing down. Silas reached into the interior pocket of the jacket he had just taken back. He removed a folded document. Single sheet. He set it on the tray table between them face down and left his hand on top of it. Orion watched the hand. "The assassination attempt Tuesday had a second layer," Silas said. "The vehicle on the South Road was not waiting by accident. It was parked there 11 minutes before your brother's car made the routing decision. That decision was made by your internal dispatch system. No external party had access to the dispatch log in that window." Orion ran it in his head. Dispatch logs inside the Veil network were triple-layered. Biometric access. Rotating key authentication. The list of people who could touch that system without triggering an alert was extremely short. "You're telling me someone inside the network fed the route to a second team?" I'm telling you, the second team was already moving before the route was confirmed, which means whoever fed it didn't wait for confirmation. They already knew. That was different. That was not a leak. That was advanced knowledge. Advanced knowledge meant someone had access not just to systems but to planning, to conversation, to the kind of information that did not live in any database. It lived in rooms. You said 14 months of watching, Orion said. 14 months. And you said nothing. I said nothing, Silas confirmed. He lifted his hand from the document, did not turn it over. Why? Because for the first 12 of those months I wasn't certain enough to act on it. Information without precision is just noise. I don't deal in noise. Orion looked at him. And the last 2 months. Silas was quiet for a moment. I was building something I could hand you without being dismissed. There was no ego in the way he said it. No performance. It landed the way practical sentences land when the person speaking them is simply describing a process they completed. Orion felt something shift slightly in his chest. Not warmth. Not trust. Something earlier than both of those. The particular sensation of recognizing that another person has been operating on a longer timeline than you knew, and doing it without requiring your awareness. He did not comment on it. Show me the document, Orion said. Silas turned it over. It was a timeline, printed in clean columns. Dates, times, and adjacent events. Orion scanned it left to right, then went back to the beginning and read it properly. He got to the third entry and stopped. This date, he said. March 9th, Silas said. That was a private meeting. For people in the room. My brothers and one other. 3 people left that room with the same information, Silas said. 2 of them had no motive and no mechanism. The third did. You're pointing at someone by omission. I'm pointing at a pattern. You draw your own conclusion. Orion looked up at him. You're careful. I'm precise, Silas said. There's a difference. Careful means you're afraid of something. Precise means you've already accounted for it. Orion set the document down. He turned it face down again the way Silas had brought it and pushed it back slightly. He needed the table between them to feel like a table again and not a bridge. The person who wants one of the triplets dead, Orion said slowly, is already inside the Veil Empire. It was not a question. He was saying it the way you say a sentence you have been constructing internally for several minutes and now need to hear in the open air to know whether it holds together. It held together. Silas did not respond. He let the statement stand. The jet hit a slight turbulence pocket. The frame shuddered once, brief and structural, like the plane clearing its throat. The lights stayed steady. Then stillness again. Demarian had moved to the rear partition. His back was to them now. Orion noted it. Either Demarian was giving him deliberate privacy or he was uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Both possibilities mattered. Your evidence, Orion said. How much of it exists on paper? Some. And the rest? Digital. Encrypted. Off any network your empire controls. Smart. If the source of the leak was internal, keeping evidence off Veil-connected infrastructure was the only way to ensure it remained uncompromised. Orion thought about that for a moment. Then he thought about the fact that Silas had been sitting on this for 2 months. Not moving. Not using it as leverage. Not selling it. Not approaching intermediaries. Waiting. For this. For a plane over the Atlantic and 2 men with no exit and no audience. You picked this moment deliberately, Orion said. Silas met his eyes. I did. Because you knew I'd have no way to avoid the conversation. Because I knew you'd actually listen. That was a different thing entirely. Orion sat with it. He had been told many things in many rooms by many people who believed they understood him. His father had told him he was too measured. His enemies told him he was cold. His brothers occasionally told him he carried too much without asking for help. Silas had said none of those things. He had said, I knew you'd listen. which implied that Silas had observed him long enough to know the difference between Orion's refusal to hear something and Orion's willingness to receive it given the right conditions. That level of attention did not come from 14 months of watching business patterns. That came from watching the man. Orion did not say that. He looked back at the document. You said the person inside the Empire is someone with access to private meeting content, he said. Yes. And someone with enough proximity to the brothers to have advanced knowledge of movements. Yes. That narrows it significantly. It does. To someone who is close enough to one of us to be unremarkable. Silas said nothing. He did not need to. The silence was its own answer. Orion felt it the way you feel a room temperature drop. Slowly. Then all at once. He looked at the document still sitting face down on the tray table. And then, without understanding exactly why, he looked at Silas. Silas was watching him with that same steady, unreadable expression. Dark eyes. Composed features. The kind of face that gave nothing away except the fact that the person behind it was paying absolute attention. You have more, Orion said. I have more. Where? Silas reached into his jacket again. This time what he produced was a small black drive. Flat, barely larger than a thumb. He held it between two fingers and set it on the tray table next to the document. He did not say anything. He looked at it. Then at Orion. Then he looked toward the front of the aircraft where the cockpit door sat closed and perfectly ordinary. Orion tracked the look. He looked at the cockpit door. Looked at the galley partition. Looked at the rear of the cabin where Demarion was still standing with his back turned. Something moved in his mind. A slow recognition. Someone on this plane is listening, Orion said quietly. Silas did not answer. He didn't have to. The silence confirmed it. Orion's hand closed around the drive on the table. He kept his hand closed around the drive and did not look at it. Looking at it would be a visible reaction. A visible reaction would tell whoever was watching exactly what had passed between them. Orion slid the drive to the edge of the tray table and let his jacket sleeve cover it as he shifted in his seat. A casual movement. A man adjusting after a long flight. He let it stay there. He had spent his life learning how to do things in plain sight. Silas had already turned back toward the window. He was giving Orion the cover of looking unengaged. Another deliberate move. Orion used the time. He thought about his brothers. Cassian had proposed to Zara 18 months ago. The engagement had been sudden enough that even Lucien had been caught off guard. And Lucien was rarely caught off guard by anything. Orion had asked, once quietly, whether Cassian had run security clearance on her. Cassian had laughed. Not unkindly. Just the way Cassian laughed at things that seemed overcautious to him. She's not a contract, he had said. She's who I want. Orion had not pushed it. He was thinking about that now. He was thinking about the March 9th meeting. For people in the room. Himself, Lucien, Cassian, and one other. An internal debrief about restructuring the Eastern Logistics Corridor. Cassian had left early. Zara had been waiting for him downstairs in the lobby of the building. Cassian had looked at his phone twice during the meeting. Orion had filed it away as nothing. Cassian was always looking at his phone. He was refiling it now. Tell me how you found the pattern, Orion said. He kept his voice below the ambient engine hum. Conversational. Nothing urgent in the tone. Silas answered at the same register. The financial routing. Explain. Your Eastern Corridor runs through 3 intermediary accounts before it consolidates. One of those accounts began receiving microtransfers 14 months ago. Small enough to clear automated review. Regular enough to be a signal. The transfers originated from a personal account that does not appear in any veiled documentation. How personal? Registered to a name with no public profile. Clean credit history. No corporate affiliations. No social presence. Silas paused. The kind of profile you build deliberately. Orion thought about what kind of person built a profile that looked like nothing. A person who had been planning for a long time. The account is connected to your operation. How? Orion said. The outgoing transfers align with timeline gaps in your security rotation records. Every time your Eastern Corridor rotation changed schedule, a transfer went out within 6 hours. Rotation schedules were internal, classified. They lived in the security management system. Access to that system was biometric and logged. Pull the access logs for that system, Orion said, more to himself than to Silas. I already did. Orion looked at him. Before this flight, Silas said. I have a source inside your perimeter-facing IT layer, not someone who works for you. Someone who audits the systems that your systems report to. That was a level of preparation that most people never reached. You did not think to audit the auditors unless you had been watching long enough to know the auditors were the vulnerability. 14 months. Orion thought about what 14 months of focused attention looked like. It looked like this. Quiet. Thorough. Building slowly toward a single moment of use. You've been building a case, Orion said. I've been building something I could hand you without it falling apart under pressure. And the source in my IT audit layer has no idea what the information was for, Silas said. He thought he was helping me build a market intelligence report on Veil infrastructure. Standard competitive analysis. You compartmentalized him. I compartmentalize everything. Orion believed it. He thought about Lucian, who did the same thing, who kept information in separate rooms and never let anyone see the full floor plan. Orion had always thought that was a Lucian trait, something particular to the way the eldest triplet processed the world. Looking at Silas now, he revised that assumption. Some people were simply built that way, structured from the inside out, not cold by personality but by design, because the alternative was vulnerability and vulnerability was a door. He understood that completely. He had been built the same way. The difference was that Orion had 3 brothers to carry the weight with. He looked at Silas and for one moment, one clean and unguarded moment, wondered who Silas divided his weight with. Then he set it aside. The transfers, Orion said. You traced the outgoing account to a holding structure in Liechtenstein, Silas said, which connects through 2 layers to a consulting firm in Rotterdam that has active contracts with 4 of your known competitors. 4. So the information was not going to one buyer. It was going to a network. Someone inside the Veil operation had been feeding a coordinated group for over a year. Not a rival family. Not a single enemy. A network with 4 separate organizational interests who all wanted the same outcome. The Veil Empire weakened, or fractured, or gone. And the way you fractured a triplet alpha bloodline was not through the markets or the legal channels or even direct attack. You went after the bond. You made one of them a target. And then you watched the other 2 spend their strength trying to protect him instead of watching their own backs. Orion felt the full shape of it come together in his mind. It was elegant in the way that dangerous things are sometimes elegant. Not admirable, just precise. They targeted Cashin, Orion said. Cashin is visible, Silas said. He draws attention. He moves through public space more than either of you. He's the face people remember. And if Cashin falls, Lucian goes dark, locks down, and you spend yourself running between protection and recovery, which was exactly what Orion had been doing for 72 hours, without sleeping, without eating properly, without telling either of his brothers the full scope of what he suspected because he did not have enough to act on and he refused to panic them without certainty. Carrying it alone, the way he always carried things. He looked out the window. The sky was black and absolute. No stars visible from this altitude at this angle. Just the dark pressing up against the oval glass. Then the lights in the cabin flickered. Once, brief, back to normal. Orion's head came back around immediately. The entertainment screens went dark. The status panel above the galley went off. Silas had gone still in a different way. Not the controlled stillness from before. The alert stillness of someone who recognized a change. Orion reached for his phone. No signal. He had expected that over the Atlantic. But the jet's internal communication channel, the one that connected to the cockpit and to ground relay, that should have had a reading. It had nothing. He looked at the panel above the galley. It stayed dark. Something had just cut the plane's signal. All of it. At once. Silas looked at the cockpit door. Then at Orion. He said nothing. He did not need to. The panel above the galley had been dark for 4 minutes. Orion had counted. For minutes of no signal, no cabin status, no connectivity to the cockpit relay. The entertainment screens stayed off. The ambient lighting stayed on, but it was running on its own loop now, not on the central system. He could tell the difference. Most people couldn't. Orion had spent enough time on enough jets to know that the quality of the cabin light shifted when the central panel went down. It went from a managed warm tone to something slightly flatter. Clinical almost. The lighting was flat now. Demarian had noticed. He had moved from the rear partition to the mid-cabin seat and was sitting very still with his hands folded in his lap and his eyes making a slow, steady circuit of every visible surface in the cabin. Orion recognized that mode. It was the mode Demarian entered when he had identified a problem and had not yet located the source. The flight attendants were both seated. One was looking at her lap. The other was looking at the galley partition with a careful expression that was trying very hard to look unconcerned. Orion looked at the cockpit door. Closed. The status light above it that indicated pilot-accessible communication was dark. That light stayed on during normal operation. Always. Even on short flights. It was connected to a separate circuit from the main panel. It was dark. That was the part that mattered. A main panel going down had explanations. Surge, reset, automated diagnostic cycle. Any of those could produce a temporary blackout on cabin systems. A separate circuit failing at the same moment as the main panel did not have simple explanations. How long before anyone on the ground notices a relay gap? Silas said quietly. 40 minutes if we're lucky, Orion said. Longer if the gap looks like routine atmospheric interference. And we're over what? Open water. Mid-Atlantic. He looked at the window. No civilian radar coverage in this corridor. Military tracking but no response protocol for private jets under blackout unless we drop altitude. Silas absorbed this. He was doing the same math Orion was doing. Closed system. No contact in or out. Water below. No anchor to anyone on the ground. Whatever was going to happen inside this plane was going to happen without witnesses, without backup, and without the possibility of a call for help. You said someone on board is listening, Orion said. Yes. Not watching. Listening. Yes. That distinction was important. Watching required a line of sight. Listening required proximity to a signal, a device, a feed, something that could carry audio from the cabin to a receiver. Planted device or a person? Orion said. I don't know which, Silas said. Possibly both. Orion's eyes moved across the cabin one more time. Demarian. Loyal. 30 years. No motive. No mechanism he would have access to that the Vale brothers didn't have visibility on. Flight attendants. Contracted through a third-party service. Background checked but not Vale internal. Either of them could have had a device placed on them without knowing. Or with knowing. The pilot. He had been the Vale family's preferred pilot for 6 years. That was a long relationship. Long relationships could be turned if the pressure applied was the right kind. And the co-pilot was a substitute. The regular co-pilot had called in the day before the flight. Last-minute replacement. Cleared through the charter service. Documentation clean. Documentation clean meant someone had cleaned it. The co-pilot, Orion said. Silas looked at him. Replacement. Last minute. Standard verification. Orion's voice was flat and steady. It's the easiest point of insertion and the least likely to trigger a review because it went through official channels. Which means whoever placed him there expected the charter service to be the last checkpoint. Yes. And the charter service uses a standard verification vendor, not Vale Internal. Orion paused. Not Moreau either. Silas looked at him without expression. I'm not accusing you, Orion said. I know, Silas said. That settled something. Briefly. Orion looked at the drive in his hand. He had kept it closed in his palm for the last 20 minutes, the edge of it pressing against his fingers. What's on here, he said. Financial records, 12 months of transfer logs, 3 voice recordings. Silas paused. And a name. Orion did not open his hand. He looked at Silas instead. You had this the whole time, he said. Yes. And you waited until we were on a plane with a compromised cockpit and a dead signal to tell me. Silas held his gaze. I waited until we were in a room where neither of us could run from the conversation. Orion's jaw tightened. Not with anger. With the effort of not acknowledging that the logic of it was sound. Because if Silas had come to him on the ground, in his office, on his own territory, Orion would have controlled the meeting. He would have taken the information, filed it, thanked Silas with the appropriate distance, and run his own verification before acting. He would have never sat still long enough to actually hear it. Up here there was no filing it, no redirecting it, no handing it to a team and moving on. Up here there was just the two of them and the flat light and the dead signal and whatever was on the drive. The name on the drive, Orion said. Yes. Someone in my inner circle. Someone in Cashin's inner circle, Silas corrected. Gently, precisely. Orion went very still. Play it through, Orion said. His voice was quiet now. Below the engine hum, Silas looked at him. If it's someone in Cashin's circle, Orion said, and it's someone with access to private planning conversations, and it's someone unremarkable enough that none of us flagged them, he stopped. He looked at the drive. He opened his hand. The drive sat in his palm. Small, black, flat. He looked up at Silas. The traitor, Orion said slowly, is closer than I think. Closer than you want to think, Silas said. There's a difference. The engine hum continued. The flat light stayed flat. Demarion was watching them now from the mid-cabin seat. Not interrupting. Just watching. Orion looked at the cockpit door one more time. Still dark above it. And then Silas said, almost too quietly to hear, open it when you're ready. He meant the drive. Orion looked at it in his palm. He thought about Cashin. Loud, warm, force of nature Cashin who had looked at a woman and decided she was who he wanted without running clearance. He thought about the March 9th meeting. He thought about Cashin checking his phone twice. He thought about Zara waiting in the lobby downstairs. And something in his chest that had been held tightly for 72 hours began to pull in a different direction. He closed his fingers around the drive again. Tell me everything, he said, before I open it. Tell me everything you know. Silas looked at him for a moment. Then he began. Which character do you think is more dangerous right now? Silas for knowing everything, or whoever is listening from inside that plane? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you want to know what's on that drive and whose name just ended everything. The drive opened on the third attempt. Orion had needed to find a port. The jet's secondary console, the one built into the armrest panel between the two forward seats, had a slot. He had not used it before. He used it now. The screen embedded in the console surface flickered on. Files loaded. Silas leaned slightly to see. Not crowding. Just close enough. The first folder was labeled with a date. 14 months ago. Orion opened it. Financial records. Transfer logs. Exactly what Silas had described. Column after column of microamounts moving through the Liechtenstein holding structure. Small enough to pass automated review. consistent enough to form a pattern that only made sense when you laid all 14 months side by side. Orion scrolled. The pattern was undeniable. Every single transfer aligned within hours of a Vale internal security rotation change. Not approximately aligned. Precisely. The kind of precision that did not happen by coincidence. The kind that required someone with a calendar, an access log, and a direct line to the rotation scheduling system. How many total transfers? Orion said. 47, Silas said. Over 14 months. 47 discrete signals sent outward. 47 moments when someone inside the Vale structure had flagged a change and passed it along. Orion thought about what 47 looked like in practice. It looked like a year of trust being used as a weapon. He opened the second folder. Voice recordings. 3 files. Each labeled only with a duration. He tapped the first one. The audio was clear. A phone call. 2 voices. One was muffled. The receiving end, reconstructed from a partial recording, meaning whoever had captured this had been on the same physical side as the first speaker. The first speaker was female. Her voice was measured. Low. The kind of low that was trained, not natural. She said, "The rotation changes Tuesday. He won't use the south exit. They never use it twice in a row." The second voice, muffled and partial, said something that came through as 2 words. Confirmed. Wednesday. The recording ended. Orion did not move. He sat with the silence of the playback for a moment. Then he said, "Play it again." Silas reached over and tapped the file. Played again. The first speaker's voice. Measured. Low. Trained. "The rotation changes Tuesday. He won't use the south exit. They never use it twice in a row." Orion had heard that voice before. Not often. Not in professional settings. In a hallway once, when she had not known he was there. In the background of a call with Cashin that Orion had accidentally picked up before realizing his brother was already on the line. Twice at family dinners that Cashin had insisted were important. Low. Measured. The kind of voice that did not draw attention to itself. Zara. He did not say her name aloud. He tapped the screen off. He looked at the console panel without seeing it. Behind him, Demarian shifted in his seat. Silas said nothing. He was giving Orion the space to run through it. Not filling it with reassurance. Not softening it. Just letting the reality sit in the open air where it had to be dealt with. Orion appreciated that more than he would ever say. He opened the third folder. Bank transfers. These were different from the micro amounts. These were large. Quarterly. Moving from the Rotterdam consulting firm back through 2 layers and depositing into an account registered to a property holding company. He scrolled to the property holding company's registered address. Manhattan, Upper West Side. He knew the building. He had been there once, carrying flowers he had not chosen, at Cashin's insistence, for a dinner that had lasted 3 hours. Zara's apartment building. That was the moment it stopped being a theory. He pressed his thumb to the edge of the console and the screen went dark. The cabin was very quiet. The flat light, the engine hum, Demarian's breathing from the rear seats, the complete absence of any signal from the cockpit panel. Orion sat very straight with his hands on his knees. "She's been in position since before the engagement," he said. 18 months before, Silas said. 18 months before the engagement. That meant she had been placed before any of them knew Cashin was interested in her. Before anyone could have predicted the attachment. Which meant the network had identified Cashin as the target years before making the move. Which meant they had studied the Vale brothers long enough to know that Cashin was the one most likely to bring someone inside without running a full security screen. Not because Cashin was weak, because Cashin loved without conditions. And they had aimed directly at that. Orion felt something in his chest that had no clean name. It was not anger. Not yet. It was the specific pain of watching the most genuine thing about your brother get used against him. He doesn't know, Orion said. No, Silas said. Lucian. Also no. How long has she had access to the planning layer? Since the engagement was announced. That's when her access to the scheduling system appears. Someone on your staff added her as an approved contact for logistics coordination. Framed as a convenience measure for coordinating Cashin's personal calendar. A convenience measure. Standard. Unremarkable. The kind of administrative decision that a mid-level staff member made 100 times a year. Orion thought about who on the staff had made that specific call. He thought about the fact that whoever made it had either been part of the network or had been manipulated into it without knowing. Both possibilities were problems. But one of them was fixable. The other would require something different. The second recording, Orion said. Listen to it when we land, Silas said. Not here. Orion looked at him. It names 2 more people, Silas said. His voice was low and exact. People who are currently in the building where your brothers are. The sentence did not land softly. It landed the way a phone call at 3 in the morning lands. All weight. No cushion. Orion looked at the dark cockpit status light. No signal. No way to warn anyone. No way to reach Lucian or Cashin or anyone in the building where 2 people whose names were on a recording were currently operating unchecked. And landing was still. He checked the panel. 40 minutes out. 40 minutes. Cashin's fiancé had been in position for over 2 years. Cashin was with her right now. Orion sat with that for exactly 30 seconds. Then he moved. He stood, turned to Demarian and said 2 words. Secure channel. Demarian was already up. Main relay is down. Secondary 2. I tried the pilot's emergency line 6 minutes ago. No response. From the pilot or from the line? From both. That confirmed it. The cockpit was not unavailable. The cockpit was sealed. The co-pilot, Orion said. Replacement. Cleared through Hartwell Charter. Get me his file. Demarian pulled out a tablet. The tablet had been running offline since before the signal dropped. He had been prepared. He always had been. He pulled up the file and handed it over. Orion scanned it. Name Trevor Ash. 31. 6 years commercial aviation. 2 years charter. References clean. Certification current. Nothing wrong with it. Which was exactly the problem. Files that were genuinely clean had friction. Small gaps. An expired endorsement renewed at the last minute. A reference who answered on the second call instead of the first. Normal human paperwork trail with imperfect edges. This file had no imperfect edges. It was smooth all the way through. Orion handed it back to Demarian. He was placed. I agree. Can you reach the pilot directly? Not through the system. Through the cockpit door. Demarian looked toward the front of the aircraft. The door was reinforced. Standard post, 2001 aviation protocol. Could not be opened from the cabin side without the pilot's cooperation or a code. Not without triggering the lockdown sensor, Demarian said. Which would give whoever is in that cockpit a direct alert that we're approaching. Orion thought about that. If the co-pilot was the placed party, then approaching the cockpit door was the action that would accelerate whatever the endgame was. And the endgame had to be landing dependent. Whatever was planned, it could not happen mid-air without taking out the plane entirely. The network needed the plane to land. They needed Orion functional enough to reach ground, because the real target was not him. The real target was what he would do when he landed. If he landed without knowing what he was walking into. If he walked straight into the building where Cashin was. If he called a family emergency meeting. And Zara was in the room. Orion went still. He ran it forward. Landing. Emergency. Cashin called. Meeting convened. Orion reveals the information. Zara is present because Cashin brings her everywhere now. Zara disappears within hours. Evidence trail compromised. The 2 people named in the second recording know an alert was triggered before Orion can reach them. Everything on the drive becomes usable in court but operationally dead because the network has already been warned. And Cashin is left with the wreckage. Not just the betrayal, the public wreckage. Because whoever was running Zara would not leave quietly. They would burn what they could on the way out. Documents surfaced to press contacts. Transactions made to look like Cashin had known. The fiancé who turned out to be a planted operative. And suddenly the story was not about the Vale family being targeted but about the Vale family being dirty. And Cashin, who loved without conditions, would be the face of it. Orion felt the weight of that settle in him like stone in water. Slow. All the way down. He turned to Silas. She was not recruited, Orion said. She was trained. Silas nodded once. Before Cashin. Before the engagement. Before any of it. Years before, Silas said. The transfer records go back further than 14 months. That's just when I started tracking. The earlier records are harder to access but the pattern is there. She was operational before the relationship started. Operational. That was the word. Not a person who got turned by pressure or money or circumstance. A person who had been pointed in a direction and had spent years walking toward it without breaking stride. Orion thought about 2 years of family dinners. Cashin's voice on the phone talking about her. The way he said her name, like it was not a name but a decision he had made and was proud of. 2 years of Cashin not knowing. Does she know we're on this plane? Orion said. Yes. Does she know about you? Silas paused. She knows I exist. She does not know what I've been building. How certain? Certain enough to have given you the drive. That was a precise answer. It meant Silas had weighed the risk of Zara's network knowing about him against the evidence on the drive and had decided the evidence was more important than his cover. He had made himself a target to give Orion the truth. Orion looked at him. Silas met the look without flinching. The second recording names 2 people inside your family's building, Orion said. Yes. And if we land without warning them, they'll be gone within 2 hours of your arrival. The network has a tripwire. If Orion Vale lands and moves directly to the Eastern Operations floor, it signals that he knows. They evacuate. But if I don't go to the Eastern floor, then you have a window. Orion looked at the dark status light above the cockpit door. A window. 40 minutes to figure out how to land, enter the building, locate 2 people who were not expecting to be found, and remove them from proximity to his brothers before the network's tripwire was triggered, while still carrying a drive full of evidence he could not yet legally activate. While Cashin's fiancée was somewhere in that building. While Cashin did not know any of it. The engine hum continued. Demarion was watching Orion from across the aisle with an expression that said, "Tell me what to do and I will do it." That was the thing about Demarion. He did not need the full picture. He needed a direction and he moved. Orion turned back to Silas. "If I make a move on landing," Orion said quietly, "and it goes wrong, Cashin takes the fall publicly." "Yes." "And Lucian locks down and I lose the operational window." "Yes." "So the only way this works is quietly." "Yes." No emergency meeting. No family alert. No visible deviation from a normal return. Silas looked at him. "You walk off that plane," Silas said slowly, looking exactly like a man who came home from a routine summit. Nothing urgent. Nothing changed. While everything has. Orion exhaled. He had done hard things before. He had sat in rooms with people who wanted him destroyed and spoken in complete sentences and smiled when he needed to. He had delivered bad news to his brothers in calm voices. He had buried his own fear in the deepest part of himself and operated from the surface without letting the two connect. This was different. This was walking back into his brother's life knowing what he knew. Looking at Cashin. Looking at Zara. And doing nothing visible. "How long do I have once I land?" Orion said. 6 hours. Maybe less. And the 2 people in the building. They move at midnight if no alert is triggered. Orion checked the panel. 38 minutes to landing. He sat back down. He looked at his hands. He thought about Cashin at the engagement dinner, standing at the head of the table with Zara beside him, raising a glass, laughing at something Lucian said with his whole chest the way only Cashin laughed. All the way out, nothing held back. Nothing held back. Ever. That was the thing about Cashin. He gave everything forward. And someone had spent years calculating exactly how to use that. Orion closed his eyes for 3 seconds. Just 3. Then he opened them. He looked at Silas. "Walk me through the 2 people in the building," he said. "Name, location, role, and removal protocol." Silas reached into his jacket. He pulled out one more folded sheet, and he handed it over without a word. The landing gear came down at 11:43 at night. Orion heard it lock into place, that particular mechanical thud that meant the ground was close. He had been on enough planes to know the sound the way some people knew church bells. He straightened his jacket, adjusted his cuffs, picked up the whiskey glass that had been empty for 2 hours and set it on the tray table at a natural angle. The kind of angle a man who had traveled comfortably would leave it. All performance, all surface. Underneath it, every single thing had changed. Demarion was in the rear seat with the folded sheet memorized and destroyed. He had used the small flame of a lighter to burn it in the empty whiskey glass 2 minutes after Orion finished reading it. The ash at the bottom of the glass looked like nothing more than the residue of a cigar. Nobody would look twice. The cabin lights had come back on 12 minutes before descent, which meant whatever had cut the signal had been resolved, or had resolved itself, which meant it had served its purpose and the person controlling it had let it go. Orion had noted the exact minute the lights returned. He had noted the corresponding shift in Silas's expression, a brief, controlled tightening around the eyes. That told him Silas had also expected the signal to stay down longer. Something had changed the timeline. He did not know what. There was no way to know until he was on the ground, which meant the 6-hour window Silas had estimated might now be shorter. The jet touched down with a single smooth impact, and the reverse thrust pressed them both forward as the runway resistance slowed the aircraft to taxi speed. Normal. Everything normal looking. When the door opened, Orion walked off the plane at the pace of a man who had done this 100 times. Which he had. Silas came off behind him. At the bottom of the stairs, on the tarmac, under the flat white lights of the private terminal, Orion stopped and turned. He looked at Silas directly. For a moment neither of them said anything. This was the place in the evening where, on a normal return from a summit, they would exchange a formal parting. Cold, distant, appropriate. 2 rivals concluding a ceasefire and walking back to their respective territories. Orion looked at him. Silas met the look with the same even attention he had maintained for the entire flight. "You could have used this differently," Orion said. Silas did not answer immediately. "The drive," Orion continued. "The recordings. The financial trail. All of it. That's leverage. Real leverage. You could have walked into any room with that and come out with half the Vale Eastern Corridor." "Yes," Silas said. "But you didn't." "No." "Why?" Silas looked at him for a moment. Just looked. The tarmac wind moved across them both. The terminal lights were steady overhead. "Because everyone around you," Silas said quietly, "uses your strength, your position, your name, your capability." He paused. "I was watching for 14 months. That's not what I saw." Orion held the eye contact. "What did you see?" he said. "A man who carries everything alone because he doesn't trust anyone to carry it with him." Silas's voice was even, not soft, just exact. "And who gets so tired sometimes that his body just stops." The weight of it arrived fully. 37,000 feet worth of it. Orion's jaw moved once. He controlled it. "You're not doing this out of altruism," Orion said. "No," Silas said. I'm doing it because the network targeting your family is the same network that has been eating at the edges of the Moreau structure for 3 years. If the Vale Empire fractures, I lose the only counterweight that keeps that network from expanding west. Orion took that in. Practical. Honest. No performance around it. So this is mutual interest, Orion said. This started as mutual interest, Silas said. The tarmac wind came through again. Orion noticed what was not said. He left it alone. He looked at the terminal. Inside, somewhere in the private arrivals lane, his car was waiting. Demarion's team would be falling in around the vehicle. The driver would have the route to the building already loaded. He had 47 minutes to reach the building before midnight. He had 2 people to locate and remove quietly. He had a brother who did not know yet. He had a name on a drive that he could not unseal publicly until he had the physical evidence secured. And he had 6 hours. Maybe less. He looked back at Silas. I need one thing from you, Orion said. Name it. If I can't reach the 2 people before midnight, if they move before I get there. He paused. The second recording. The one naming them. Where is the original file? Silas held his gaze. Secured off-site, Silas said. In a location only I can access. And if something happens to you tonight, then it's already been forwarded to a third party with instructions to deliver it to your legal counsel and a specific investigative journalist whose name you'll find in the last document on the drive. Orion looked at him. He thought about what that meant. It meant Silas had anticipated the possibility of his own removal from the situation, and had built around it. Not frantically, not recently, in advance. You've been planning for every version of this, Orion said. I told you, Silas said. I don't deal in noise. Something in Orion's chest did the thing it had been doing since 37,000 feet. The thing he was not naming. He extended his hand. Silas looked at it. Then he took it. The handshake lasted 2 seconds. Firm. No performance. Orion released it. He turned toward the terminal. He had taken 4 steps when Silas's voice came from behind him. Quiet. Just above the wind. Orion. He stopped. Did not turn fully. If I choose wrong tonight, Orion said without turning, and one of my brothers gets hurt, you're not going to choose wrong, Silas said. Orion stood still for 1 beat. Then he walked through the terminal doors. The building's lobby was empty when Orion walked through the east entrance at 11:51. 12 minutes to midnight. 12 minutes before the network's window closed and 2 people walked out of the building and into the dark where recovering them would require noise and noise would cost cash and everything. He did not take the main elevator. He used the service corridor. Demarion had the key code from a secondary access they had installed 18 months ago for emergency protocols. A precaution that had never been needed until tonight. The corridor was narrow. Concrete walls. Overhead fluorescence. The kind of space that existed in every large building and that no one thought about until they needed it. Orion moved through it at pace. Demarion was beside him. One other member of the security team was stationed at the lobby entrance with instructions to hold and observe. Nothing visible. Nothing that would register as a security escalation. They reached the service elevator. 14th floor. Eastern Operations Wing. The elevator moved up in silence. Orion looked at the floor counter. 9, 10, 11. He thought about what he needed to do in the next 11 minutes. The 2 names from the recording were Philomena Graves and Dion Ashford. Philomena was Cashin's personal operations coordinator. Dion was the logistics analyst who had been added to the Eastern Corridor team 14 months ago. The same month the transfers began. Philomena had been with the family for 4 years. She had received a commendation from Lucien 2 years ago for handling a crisis situation with precision. She was trusted, embedded, the kind of person whose absence from a room nobody noticed because her presence had always been so unremarkable. Dion was newer. He had come in through a legitimate headhunting firm. His work was clean. His results were good. He was the kind of hire that looked excellent on paper because he was excellent on paper. The difference was that his work had been excellent only in the areas where it mattered to make it excellent. And in the areas where information leaked out, he had been consistently present. The elevator opened on 14. The floor was operational at this hour. Eastern Corridor ran 22 hours. There were 12 people at stations. Screens lit. Conversations low. Nobody looked up. Orion walked through without breaking stride. He looked like he belonged there, because he did. He always had. He reached the glass-walled operations hub at the center of the floor and turned left into the corridor that ran toward the coordinator offices. Philomena's office was the third door. Light on inside. She was there. He paused at the door, breathed once, opened it. She looked up from her screen. For half a second, just half, something moved in her expression that was not surprise. It was recognition. Not the kind that comes from seeing your employer walk through the door unexpectedly. The kind that comes from knowing, for just one fraction of a second, that the thing you had been waiting to happen was happening now. Then it was gone. She reset to professional concern. Mr. Vale, I wasn't expecting you tonight. How was Boston? Orion stepped inside and closed the door behind him. We need to talk, he said. Sit down. She sat. She did it too quickly. Not nervous. Positioned. He looked at her for a moment. Then he opened the conversation the way he opened every conversation that mattered. Calmly. Precisely. With exactly enough information to watch what moved in the other person's face. I know about the transfers, he said. Her hands on the desk did not move. That was the tell. A genuinely innocent person's hands would have moved. Would have shifted. Reached for a pen. Reached for water. Done something reflexive. Hers stayed completely still. I don't know what transfers you mean, she said. 47, Orion said. 14 months. 6 hours after every rotation change. 1 breath. 2. Something very controlled moved through her face. Then she looked at him directly, and said nothing. Demarian stepped in behind Orion and closed the door. That was all it took. 12 minutes became 11. Became 10. Dion Ashford was located on the operations floor itself. He had seen Orion walk through. He had waited exactly 40 seconds. Orion had counted from his peripheral line while he handled Philomena, and then he had moved toward the stairwell exit. Demarian's second team was at the stairwell. Dion did not get to the door. Both were secured. Quietly. Without a single person on the floor knowing what had happened in the 40 seconds that looked like nothing more than a shift in foot traffic. Orion stood in the corridor at 12:02. 2 minutes past the window. 2 minutes past the point at which the network's tripwire had been set to fire. The tripwire had fired, but both people were already contained. The network had sent the signal and received nothing back. Orion reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out his phone. The signal was full and clean and steady. He had been back on the ground long enough. He dialed Lucien. It rang once. You're back, Lucien said. His voice was awake. It was always awake. I'm on 14, Orion said. Get to the building. Come alone. Leave Cashin where he is for now. A pause. How bad? Lucien said. Orion looked down the corridor. Clean. Quiet. The hum of the operations floor behind the glass. He thought about Cashin. He thought about Zara. He thought about a man who gave everything forward and had no idea. Come now, Orion said. He ended the call. He stood in the corridor for a moment with the phone still in his hand. Then he thought about the tarmac. The 2 seconds of a handshake. The wind. A quiet voice saying, you're not going to choose wrong. He had not. But what came next was going to cost. It was going to cost Cashin something that could not be returned. And there was no way to carry that for him. Not even partially. Not this time. Orion stood in the corridor and let himself feel it. Just for a moment. Just enough. Then he put his phone away and turned to face what came next. Lucian arrived at 12:21. He came through the service corridor the same way Orion had. He did not ask how Orion had known to tell him to use that entrance. He already knew the answer. He always knew. He walked into the coordinator office where Orion was waiting, looked at Philomena in the chair in the corner with Demarian standing behind her, looked at the expression on Orion's face, and then looked at the drive sitting on the desk. He sat down. Orion played him the recording. Lucian listened to the whole thing without moving. His hands were on his knees. His face was still. His eyes did not leave the drive. When it finished, he said, "How long?" "Over 2 years of access," Orion said. "Possibly longer on the outside coordination." Lucian was quiet. Not the silence of a man who had nothing to say. The silence of a man who was deciding the exact order in which to say too many things at once. "Cassian," Lucian said. "He doesn't know," Orion said. "We have to tell him." "I know. Tonight. I know." Lucian looked at the drive again. "You got this from Silas Moreau," he said. It was not a question. "Yes." Lucian took that in. He had always been careful about the Moreau family, careful in the way that acknowledged capability without conceding anything. He had studied Silas the same way Silas had studied them. Long and quietly. "Why?" Lucian said. "Mutual target," Orion said. "The same network." Lucian considered this for a long moment. Then, "And the other reason." Orion looked at him. Lucian had always been able to do that. Find the layer underneath the layer. See what was not being said by looking at what was being said very carefully and measuring the gap. "I'm working on that," Orion said. Lucian looked at him for one more moment. He let it go. They drove to Cassian's building at 1 in the morning. Cassian answered the door in a t-shirt and no shoes. His face registered confusion, then alert, then the specific expression of a man who knows the weight of a room before anyone in it has spoken. He looked at both of them, at Orion first, then at Lucian. "Where's Zara?" Orion said. Cassian's jaw shifted. "Upstairs." "Why?" "She needs to leave," Orion said. "Tonight. Right now." The conversation that followed lasted 47 minutes. Cassian did not shout. That was the thing about it. He sat at his own kitchen table and listened with his arms on the surface and his hands flat, and he listened to the whole thing without raising his voice once. That was harder to witness than shouting would have been. Shouting was distance. Shouting was a man putting something outside himself. Cassian kept it completely inside. He listened. He looked at the drive. He listened to the recording. He sat with it. When it was over, Lucian stepped out to make the necessary calls and Orion stayed at the table with him. They did not talk. Cassian looked at the surface of the table for a long time. He looked at his own hands. Then he said, "I checked my phone twice in the March 9th meeting." Orion looked at him. "I remember thinking she texted. She wanted to know when I was done." He paused. "I remember thinking it was good that somebody wanted to know." Orion sat with that sentence. It landed in a place that did not have language around it. He reached across the table and put his hand on his brother's arm. Cassian looked at it. He did not move away. He did not speak. He just sat there with his brother's hand on his arm in his own quiet kitchen at 1 in the morning, carrying the full and specific weight of finding out that the trust you gave completely had been received by someone who had been waiting for it. That was the hardest part, not the betrayal. The love that had been completely real on one side. 3 days later, Orion was standing at the window in his office when his phone buzzed. A message. No name in the display. Just a number. He opened it. One line. "The second recording has been forwarded to the appropriate parties. It's over." He stared at it. Then slowly he typed back. One word. "Thank you." He stared at the window for a long moment. The city was moving below. Traffic and light and the ordinary loud machinery of the world continuing to turn. He thought about a shoulder he had slept on at 37,000 feet. He thought about a coat placed over him without fanfare. He thought about a man who had been watching him for 14 months. Not to extract, not to leverage, just watching. And he thought about what his body had known before his mind caught up. That the man sitting beside him in the quiet of a private jet above the Atlantic had never once said anything that wasn't true. Not one word. Not once. He set the phone down. He thought about instinct. About what it meant when the body trusted something the mind had not yet cleared. About whether that was weakness or whether it was the only kind of intelligence that could not be faked. He thought about rivals and what that word actually required. For a rival to be a rival, they had to want the same thing. He stood at the window for a long time, and somewhere in the thought, the word rival stopped fitting entirely. He looked at the phone on the desk. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he picked it up again. He found the number. He typed, "There's something I didn't say on the tarmac." He stared at it. He sent it. 3 dots appeared on the other end. He waited. Then, "I know. I didn't say it either." Orion looked at those words. He read them once. Then again. He set the phone face down on the desk. He looked out the window at the city below. All that ordinary motion, all those lives moving through ordinary moments that carried extraordinary weight inside them. He breathed once. He picked the phone back up. And that was the moment he stopped seeing Silas as his rival, and started seeing him as the only person who had ever told him the truth. That story just proved one thing. The most dangerous person in the room is never the one making noise. It's the one who already knows everything and waits for the right moment to hand it to you. If the story moved something in you, drop a comment. Tell us, did you see the ending coming? Or did Chapter 6 change everything for you? Share this with someone who needs to hear that not every quiet person in your life is indifferent. Some of them are paying closer attention than anyone else ever has. And if you want more stories like this, slow burn, high stakes, and characters who earn every single thing they feel, subscribe right now and turn on notifications. Every story on this channel is built to stay with you. The next one starts where this one wouldn't dare.